1944. Recklin Airfield, Central, Germany. Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche stood beside a captured American fighter that would force him to rewrite everything he thought he knew about air combat. The Vought F4U Corsair sat under harsh morning light, its inverted gull wings giving it the profile of a raptor frozen mid-strike. Salt stains from its ocean voyage streaked the dark blue paint. Bomb-damaged hangar glass cast fractured shadows across the fuselage. Lerche had evaluated 25 captured Allied aircraft in the past 18 months. British Spitfires, American P-47 Thunderbolts, even a damaged B-17 Flying Fortress. Each evaluation followed the same protocol: ground inspection, systems analysis, test flight, written report. The process was methodical, scientific, stripped of emotion. But this aircraft was different. The Corsair carried a reputation that bordered on mythology. In the Pacific Theater, Japanese pilots had given it a name that needed no translation: Whistling Death. The distinctive howl of air passing through its oil coolers during high-speed dives announced death from above. Luftwaffe intelligence wanted answers. Could Germany's frontline fighters compete with this machine? What were its weaknesses? Most importantly, if the Corsair came to Europe in numbers, what tactical responses would keep German pilots alive? Lerche had 45 minutes of fuel and a cloudless morning to find out. What he would discover in less than an hour of flight time would be so devastating that Luftwaffe Command would classify his report and attempt to bury the truth. The journey of this particular Corsair to a German test facility began 3 weeks earlier over occupied Norway, July 18, 1944. Lieutenant Matterley of Britain's Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm was flying reconnaissance near the port city of Bodø when his engine began losing power. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, normally reliable, coughed and sputtered, fuel pressure dropping. He had seconds to make a choice: attempt to reach HMS Formidable in rough North Sea waters, or find land. Matterley chose survival over protocol. He spotted an open field and brought the Corsair down hard but controlled. The landing gear absorbed the impact. The airframe held together. Matterley immediately set about destroying sensitive equipment, smashing the radio, attempting to ignite the cockpit with a signal flare. German Wehrmacht troops arrived before flames could take hold. For Germany, this was extraordinary fortune. The Corsair was nearly intact, suffering only repairable damage to fuel lines and landing gear. More valuable still, this was an F4U 1 Ampere, the latest production variant with a raised cockpit that corrected the earlier model's notorious visibility problems. The local Wehrmacht commander contacted Berlin within hours. Orders came back immediately: transport this aircraft to Recklin by any means necessary. The problem was obvious. The Corsair couldn't fly with a damaged fuel system, and Germany had no spare parts for American aircraft. Disassembly for overland transport would take weeks they didn't have. The solution was audacious. Load the entire aircraft onto a cargo ship at Narvik, transport it by sea to a German port, then move it by rail to the test centre. 18 days later, on August 5th, the Corsair arrived at Recklin covered in salt spray and showing early corrosion. But it was there. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring personally ordered the evaluation. The Luftwaffe was hemorrhaging aircraft and pilots over Europe. American P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts were destroying German formations with impunity. If the Corsair entered the European theatre, German fighter tactics would need immediate revision. That responsibility fell to Lerche. At 27 years old, Hans-Werner Lerche was already among Germany's most experienced test pilots. He had logged time in over 60 different aircraft types, from 11 nations. His reports carried weight because they were technical, precise, and brutally honest. He didn't write propaganda. He documented reality. The Corsair presented a unique challenge. Unlike Spitfires or Thunderbolts, which German pilots had encountered in combat and could describe firsthand, the Corsair was completely unknown in Europe. All intelligence came from Japanese reports in the Pacific, reports describing the Corsair as nearly unbeatable when flown correctly. Lercher spent 2 full days examining the aircraft while mechanics repaired the fuel system. The engineering impressed him immediately. The inverted gull wing design solved a complex problem. The massive 13-foot propeller needed clearance from the ground, but conventional straight wings would have required impossibly long landing gear. Vort's engineers bent the wing at the root, allowing shorter, stronger gear while maintaining propeller clearance. It was elegant problem-solving. The cockpit of the F4U 1 Ampere sat higher than earlier Corsairs, addressing complaints from Navy and Marine pilots about forward visibility. 6 50-caliber machine guns, 3 per wing, carried 400 rounds each. That was 2,400 rounds of ammunition, enough for extended combat. The gun installation looked solid, well designed for minimal recoil interference, but specifications on paper meant nothing. Lurch needed to fly it. August 8th arrived with perfect conditions. Clear skies, light winds, visibility unlimited. Lurch arrived at the flight line at 0600 hours. Ground crew had completed pre-flight checks. Fuel tanks were full, all systems operational. He climbed into the cockpit and immediately noted differences from German fighters. The seat positioned him higher, providing excellent visibility over that long nose. The control stick centered between his legs rather than offset like in a Messerschmitt Bf 109. The instrument panel layout was logical, well organized, easier to scan than cluttered German cockpits. He ran through the start sequence. The R2000-800 engine erupted with a roar that shook the entire airframe. 2,000 horsepower, double the output of a Bf 109G's Daimler-Benz engine. The aircraft vibrated with barely restrained power. Lurcher taxied toward the runway, weaving side to side to see around that massive nose. Intelligence reports from captured American pilots had described this technique. On the ground, forward visibility was nearly non-existent. At the runway threshold, Lerch pushed the throttle forward. The acceleration shocked him. The Corsair lunged ahead, tail lifting almost instantly. At 80 knots indicated airspeed, he pulled back on the stick. The aircraft leaped off the runway and climbed at an angle he had never experienced in any German fighter. He leveled at 3,000 meters and began his systematic evaluation. First test, basic handling characteristics. Lerch banked left, then right, feeling how the prawns. Aircraft responded. The controls were heavy at low speed. The ailerons required significant force compared to a Focke-Wulf FW 190. The Corsair rolled slowly, reluctantly. This matched Japanese intelligence reports. At low speeds, the Corsair was not a dogfighter. It didn't want to turn. It wanted to go fast. Second test. Acceleration. Lerch pushed the throttle to maximum power and watched the airspeed indicator climb. 300 knots. 350 knots. 400 knots. The Corsair kept accelerating with no sign of strain, no vibration, no buffeting. At 420 knots, nearly 485 miles per hour, he pulled back the throttle. The F4U 190 Amperes 8, Germany's primary frontline fighter, topped out at 408 miles per hour. The speed advantage alone was significant. But it was the third test that revealed the Corsair's true nature. Lerch climbed to 6,000 meters and began vertical maneuvers. First, a simple zoom climb. Full. Throttle. Pull up sharply. See how high momentum alone could carry the aircraft. The Corsair shot upward like a rocket. 6,500 meters. 7,000 meters. 7,500 meters. The aircraft was still climbing when it finally stalled at 8,200 meters, a 1,200-meter gain on pure energy. He tried again, this time from a dive, rolled inverted, pulled through into a steep dive, accelerated to 450 knots, then hauled back hard into a vertical climb. The G-forces crushed him into the seat. The Corsair's airframe groaned but held solid. The altimeter spun wildly. 8,000 meters, 8,500 meters, 9,000 meters. Lersch held the climb until the aircraft stalled at 10,400 meters, over 34,000 feet. This was the revelation. The Corsair wasn't designed for turning dogfights like a Spitfire or Bf-109. It was designed for vertical combat. Boom and zoom tactics. Dive on the enemy from altitude, use superior speed and power to climb back up. Repeat. The massive R2800 engine gave it energy advantages no German fighter could match. Lerche tested the theory with a simulated attack run. Dive from 7,000 meters to 4,000 meters at maximum speed, pull out, then execute a maximum performance climb back to 7,000 meters. The dive was terrifying. The Corsair accelerated past 500 knots, over 575 miles per hour. The airframe shuddered but remained stable. At 4,000 meters, Lersch pulled back hard on the stick. The G-forces were crushing, perhaps 6 Gs or more. His vision tunneled to a narrow point, but the Corsair pulled through cleanly. Then came the climb. Full throttle, optimal climb speed. The aircraft rocketed upward. Lersch checked his stopwatch. 2 minutes 40 seconds to regain 3,000 meters of altitude. He had flown the FW-190 Amperes 8 through the same maneuver 2 months earlier. That climb had taken 4 minutes 15 seconds. The Corsair was 40% faster. His mind raced through tactical implications. If American pilots used these tactics over Europe, and they would because it was the only logical way to exploit the Corsair's strengths, German fighters would be at catastrophic disadvantage. The Bf-109 and FW-190 were designed for horizontal turning combat. They could outturn a Corsair at low to medium speeds. But if the Corsair never committed to a turning fight, if it stayed fast and used vertical maneuvers, German pilots would be chasing an opponent they could never catch. Lerche understood the tactical paradox immediately. If you dove after a Corsair to pursue, you burned energy trying to catch an aircraft faster than yours. By the time you gave up the chase, you were low on altitude and energy, vulnerable. If you didn't pursue, the Corsair simply climbed back to altitude unmolested and set up another attack. Either way, the German pilot lost. After 35 minutes of flight, Lersch needed to run one more critical test. He climbed back to 7,000 meters and set up a simulated combat scenario, a Corsair diving on a German formation from above. The German fighters see the attack and brake, standard defensive maneuver. The Corsair overshoots but uses its speed to extend away and climb back to altitude. Question: how long would it take a F4U-190 to climb back to the Corsair's altitude and re-engage? Lersch rolled inverted and pulled into a steep dive, simulating the attack run. He let speed build to 480 knots, then pulled out hard at 4,000 meters. The G-forces slammed him into the seat, vision greying at the edges. At the bottom of the pullout, he immediately transitioned into maximum performance climb. Full throttle, optimal climb speed of 130 knots indicated airspeed. The R2800 roared. He started his stopwatch. At 5,000 meters, 1 minute 15 seconds elapsed. At 6,000 meters, 2 minutes 20 seconds elapsed. At 7,000 meters, 3 minutes 35 seconds elapsed. Lersch leveled off and ran the numbers in his head. The same profile in a F4U-190 Amperes 8 took 5 minutes 50 seconds. The Corsair could execute a boom and zoom attack, extend away, and be back at fighting altitude a full 2 minutes 15 seconds before a pursuing F190, 2 minutes 15 seconds. In air combat, that was an eternity. But no aircraft was perfect. Lersch spent the remaining minutes probing for weaknesses. Below 150 knots, the Corsair became sluggish. The heavy ailerons required significant force to roll. In a slow-speed scissors maneuver, a common dogfighting situation, a F190 or Bf-109 would have decisive advantage. The problem was getting the Corsair into that situation. A disciplined pilot would never let it happen. He tested stall characteristics. At 85 knots, the left wing dropped sharply with little warning. The 5 knots, Corsair snap-rolled inverted before he could react. Recovery was easy, but the lesson was clear. Don't slow down in combat. He tested visibility. The raised cockpit of the F4U 1 Ampere was better than earlier models, but the long nose still created a massive blind spot directly ahead and below. In a turning fight, a German pilot could exploit this, slide into the blind spot and stay there. Again, the problem was forcing the engagement. If the Corsair never committed to a turn, the blind spot didn't matter. He tested the dive. At 520 knots, over 600 miles per hour, the controls became extremely heavy. The aircraft wanted to continue diving. Pulling out required both hands on the stick and significant effort. This was a real limitation, but the FW-190 had similar dive limitations, and the Corsair's superior power meant it could afford to dive less steeply and still maintain speed advantage. After 45 minutes of flight, Lersch had his assessment. He throttled back and began descent to Recklin. As he flew the landing pattern, weaving side to side to see past the long nose, he mentally composed his report. The conclusions were clear and devastating. He landed at 07:45 hours. Ground crew swarmed the Corsair, checking for damage. There was none. The aircraft was as solid as it looked. Lersch walked directly to the technical office and began writing. He worked for 3 hours straight, documenting every observation, every measurement, every tactical implication. The report ran 14 pages. The conclusions were blunt. The Vought F4U Corsair represents a fundamental shift in fighter design philosophy. It is not optimized for traditional turning combat. Instead, it exploits superior power, speed, and energy retention to dictate engagement terms. Against this aircraft, conventional German fighter tactics are inadequate. He detailed performance data. Maximum speed, 420 plus knots at sea level, 15%, faster than 490 amperes 8. Climb rate, 40% superior to 490 amperes, 8 inches combat climb profile. Energy retention, exceptional, can execute multiple boom and zoom attacks without significant altitude loss. Armament, 650 caliber machine guns, stable platform, adequate firepower. Weaknesses, poor low-speed maneuverability, heavy controls, vicious stall characteristics, limited forward visibility. Then came the tactical assessment, the section that would cause controversy. Recommended defensive tactics against F4U Corsair. Avoid engagement if possible. The Corsair's energy advantages make it extremely difficult to defeat in combat. If engagement is unavoidable, force slow-speed maneuvering combat. This is the only regime where German fighters have an advantage. Never pursue a Corsair in a climb or dive. You will lose energy and become vulnerable. Exploit the Corsair's forward visibility limitations in turning combat, but only if the Corsair pilot commits to the turn. Attack only. When holding significant altitude advantage of 1,500 meters or more. Even then, expect the Corsair to escape if the pilot is competent. Primary conclusion. The F4U Corsair is superior to all current German fighter aircraft in the energy fighting regime. If deployed to the European theatre in significant numbers, it will pose a severe threat to Luftwaffe operations. Lersch signed the report and submitted it through channels. He knew what would happen next. The report would go to the technical office, then to the general staff, eventually to Goering himself, and Goering would be furious. 3 days later, Lersch was summoned to Berlin. The meeting was tense. A general staff officer whose name Lersch never learned questioned every conclusion. Was Lersch certain about the performance data? Had he considered that the captured Corsair might have been modified? Was he aware that his assessment contradicted intelligence reports from the Pacific? Lersch stood by his findings. The data was accurate. The Corsair was exactly as capable as his report indicated, perhaps more so since he had only 45 minutes to explore its full envelope. The officer's response was chilling. Your technical observations are noted. However, the tactical conclusions are premature. The Corsair is a naval aircraft. It will not be deployed to the European theatre in significant numbers. Your report will be classified and distributed on a need-to-know basis only. Lerche understood immediately. The report was being buried, not because it was wrong, but because it was too honest. Admitting that an Allied fighter was categorically superior to German aircraft was unacceptable to leadership invested in propaganda about German technological superiority. He returned to Rechlin and continued his work. Over the next 6 months, he would test 14 more captured Allied aircraft. Each report documented the same uncomfortable truth. Germany was losing the technological war, but the Corsair report had an unexpected afterlife. Copies circulated among Luftwaffe fighter units through unofficial channels, pilots sharing information that official command wouldn't provide. By late 1944, German pilots who had never seen a Corsair knew its capabilities and weaknesses through Lerche's report. The irony was profound. Lerche had discovered the truth about one of the war's most lethal fighters and provided actionable intelligence. But the discovery changed nothing. The Corsair never came to Europe in large numbers. It remained primarily a Pacific theater aircraft where it dominated Japanese fighters exactly as Lerche had predicted. His perfect intelligence was ignored because it contradicted the institutional narrative that Germany still held technological advantage. Hans Werner Lerche survived the war. In April 1945, as Soviet forces closed on Rechlin, he fled west and surrendered to American forces. His expertise was immediately recognized. The United States Army Air Forces recruited him to test captured German aircraft, a complete reversal of his wartime role. American intelligence officers were particularly interested in his Corsair evaluation. They confirmed every detail of his report against their own flight test data. Lerche's 45-minute assessment matched assessments that took American test pilots weeks to compile. After the war, Lerche documented his experiences extensively. His memoir, published in 1956, included detailed technical accounts of testing Allied aircraft. The book became a primary source for aviation historians studying comparative aircraft performance in World War II. He remained fascinated by the Corsair throughout his life. In interviews decades later, he called it the most impressive fighter I ever flew, and I flew over 60 types. He particularly admired the engineering philosophy: design an aircraft around a specific tactical doctrine, then execute that doctrine ruthlessly. The Corsair's combat record validated Lerche's 1944 assessment completely. In the Pacific, it achieved an 11-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese fighters. Marine and Navy pilots who flew it called it the best fighter of the war. The nickname Whistling Death proved accurate. But Lerche's experience raised profound questions about military intelligence and institutional honesty. He had provided accurate, actionable intelligence about a potential threat. Luftwaffe command chose to suppress it rather than confront uncomfortable truths about German technological inferiority. This pattern repeated throughout the German military in 1944 and 45. Officers who reported honestly about Allied capabilities were accused of defeatism. Intelligence that contradicted official narratives was buried. The result was strategic paralysis, commanders making decisions based on wishful thinking rather than reality. Lerche's Corsair test was a microcosm of this institutional failure. One test pilot, 45 minutes of flight time, and a 14-page report that told the truth. And the truth was ignored. The lesson extends far beyond World War II. In any organization, whether military, corporate, or governmental, the willingness to hear uncomfortable truths determines the difference between adaptation and collapse. Lerche provided the truth with precision and courage. The Luftwaffe chose to ignore it, selecting comfortable lies over difficult reality. Hans Werner Lerche's career as a test pilot stands as testimony to professional integrity in an environment where honesty carried personal risk. He flew the Corsair once, for 45 minutes, on a clear morning in August 1944. It was enough time to understand everything that mattered. The Corsair wasn't just superior to German fighters in specific performance metrics. It represented a completely different philosophy of air combat, one that rendered traditional dogfighting tactics obsolete. Lerche recognized this immediately, because he was a true test pilot, not a propagandist. He evaluated aircraft based on what they could do, not what he wished they could do. His report on the Corsair stands as a monument to professional integrity. He told his superiors exactly what they didn't want to hear, knowing it would be buried because the truth mattered more than career safety. That 45-minute flight over central Germany in August 1944 captured everything essential about why the Allies won the technological war. They built aircraft like the Corsair around sound engineering principles and realistic tactical doctrine. They tested honestly, reported accurately, and adapted quickly. Germany did the opposite, clinging to propaganda and institutional pride even as the evidence of Allied superiority mounted. Lerche's voice of honesty was drowned out by a system that preferred comfortable lies. The Corsair flew on to victory in the Pacific, proving every word of his buried report correct.